Study Guide, CompTIA Security Plus 601 Exam. 1.1 Compare and contrast different types of social engineering techniques. Phishing. Definition: a cyber attack where attackers masquerade as a trustworthy entity to trick individuals into revealing sensitive information. Example: an email that appears to be from a bank, requesting the recipient to update their account information by clicking on a link. Smishing. Definition: phishing attacks carried out through SMS or text messages. Example: a text message claiming to be from a shipping company, requesting the recipient to click on a link to track a package. Vishing. Definition: phishing attacks carried out through voice calls or VoIP systems. Example: a phone call claiming to be from a tech support representative, requesting the recipient to provide login credentials to fix a computer issue. Spam. Definition: unsolicited and unwanted messages sent in bulk, often promoting products, services, or scams. Example: unsolicited emails advertising weight loss supplements. Spam over instant messaging, SPIM. Definition: unsolicited and unwanted messages sent over instant messaging platforms. Example: unwanted messages promoting a fake investment opportunity sent through a messaging app. Spear phishing. Definition: a targeted phishing attack where the attacker customizes the message to appear more legitimate and relevant to the recipient. Example: an email to an employee that appears to be from their company's CEO, requesting them to share confidential company information. Dumpster diving. Definition: the act of searching through someone's trash or discarded materials to gather information that can be used for malicious purposes. Example: finding discarded financial documents or invoices containing sensitive customer information. Shoulder surfing. Definition: the act of spying on someone's screen or keyboard to steal sensitive information such as passwords or credit card numbers. Example: someone standing close to a person at an ATM and trying to observe their PIN number. Farming. Definition: an attack where attackers redirect website traffic to a malicious website that looks identical to the legitimate one, with the aim of stealing sensitive information. Example: redirecting users trying to access an online banking website to a fake website that captures their login credentials. Tailgating. Definition: gaining unauthorized access to a secured area by following closely behind an authorized person. Example: an individual entering a restricted office space by walking closely behind an employee with authorized access. Eliciting information. Definition: the act of extracting sensitive information from individuals through manipulation or deception. Example: pretending to be a customer service representative and coaxing a person into revealing their account password. Whaling. Definition: phishing attacks that specifically target high-profile individuals or executives within an organization. Example: sending a personalized email to a CEO, pretending to be their lawyer, and requesting urgent wire transfer of funds. Prepending. Definition: adding additional characters or words at the beginning of a file or data to hide malicious content. Example: adding a harmless-looking string at the beginning of an executable file to bypass antivirus detection. Identity fraud. Definition: the deliberate use of someone else's identity for financial gain or other malicious purposes. Example: using stolen personal information to open credit card accounts in someone else's name. Invoice scams. Definition: scams where attackers send fraudulent invoices to individuals or organizations, tricking them into making payments to the attacker's account. Example, sending a fake invoice to a company, posing as a trusted vendor, and requesting payment for services that were never provided. Credential harvesting. Definition: the process of collecting login credentials or personal information from unsuspecting individuals. Example, creating a fake login page for a popular website and tricking users into entering their username and password. Reconnaissance. Definition: the process of gathering information about a target to identify vulnerabilities or plan an attack. Example, scanning a network to discover open ports and services running on target systems. Hoax. Definition: false information or rumors spread with the intent to deceive or manipulate people. Example, spreading a rumor that a popular social media platform is shutting down to create panic and confusion. Impersonation. Definition: pretending to be someone else, typically with the intent to deceive or defraud others. Example, creating a fake social media profile impersonating a celebrity to trick fans into sharing personal information. Watering hole attack. Definition: an attack where attackers compromise websites that are frequently visited by their target audience, with the aim of infecting visitors with malware. Example, injecting malicious code into a popular news website to exploit vulnerabilities in visitors' browsers. Typo squatting. Definition: registering domain names that closely resemble popular websites or brands to deceive users and direct them to malicious websites. Example, registering a domain name like google.com to catch users who mistype google.com in their browser. Pretexting. Definition: creating a false scenario or pretext to manipulate individuals into revealing sensitive information or performing certain actions. Example, pretending to be a bank employee and calling a customer to request their account number and security code for a security check. Influence campaigns. Definition: coordinated efforts to shape public opinion, behavior, or beliefs through strategic messaging and manipulation techniques. Example, spreading disinformation on social media platforms to influence election outcomes or sway public opinion on specific issues. Hybrid warfare. Definition: the combination of conventional warfare, cyber attacks, and information warfare to achieve military objectives. Example, launching cyber attacks on critical infrastructure alongside physical military operations during a conflict. Social media principles, reasons for effectiveness. Authority: people tend to trust and follow the recommendations or information provided by authoritative figures. Intimidation: creating a sense of fear or intimidation to influence people's behavior or decisions. Consensus: people are more likely to adopt certain beliefs or behaviors if they perceive that many others are doing the same. Scarcity: artificially creating a sense of limited availability or urgency to drive people to take immediate action. Familiarity: people are more likely to trust and engage with content or individuals they are familiar with. Trust: building trust through consistent messaging, transparent communication, and delivering on promises. Urgency: creating a sense of urgency to prompt immediate action or response. 1.2 Given a scenario, analyze potential indicators to determine the type of attack. Malware. Definition: malicious software designed to disrupt, damage, or gain unauthorized access to computer systems. Example, a program that encrypts a user's files and demands a ransom for their release, ransomware. Ransomware.
Definition: a type of malware that encrypts a user's files and demands a ransom in exchange for the decryption key. Example: WannaCry ransomware, which infected thousands of computers worldwide in 2017, demanding payment in Bitcoin. Trojans. Definition: malware that disguises itself as legitimate software to deceive users and gain unauthorized access or control over their systems. Example: a Trojan disguised as a legitimate antivirus program, which actually allows an attacker to gain remote access to the infected system. Worms. Definition: self-replicating malware that spreads across computer networks without user intervention. Example: the Conficker worm, which infected millions of computers by exploiting a vulnerability in the Windows operating system. Potentially unwanted programs, PUPs. Definition: software that may have legitimate functionality but is often installed without the user's consent and may negatively impact system performance or security. Example: adware that displays intrusive advertisements or modifies browser settings without the user's permission. Fileless virus. Definition: malware that resides entirely in computer memory and does not write any files to disk, making it difficult to detect and remove. Example: a fileless virus that uses PowerShell scripts to execute malicious commands directly in memory without leaving traces on the file system. Command and control. Definition: the infrastructure used by attackers to communicate with and control compromised systems or malware. Example: a botnet where infected devices receive instructions from a centralized command and control server to carry out coordinated attacks. Bots. Definition: software applications that perform automated tasks, often without the user's knowledge or consent. Example: a botnet consisting of thousands of compromised computers that are used to launch distributed denial of service (DDoS) attacks. Crypto malware. Definition: malware that encrypts a user's files or entire system, making them inaccessible until a ransom is paid. Example: CryptoLocker, a type of malware that encrypts files on a victim's computer and demands payment in cryptocurrency to decrypt them. Logic bombs. Definition: malicious code that remains dormant until triggered by a specific event or condition. Example: a programmer inserts code into an application that will delete all files on a specific date or when a specific action occurs. Spyware. Definition: malware that secretly collects information about a user's activities, often without their knowledge or consent. Example: spyware that records keystrokes and captures screenshots to steal login credentials and sensitive information. Keyloggers. Definition: software or hardware devices that capture and record keystrokes entered by a user, often used to steal passwords and other confidential information. Example: a hardware keylogger installed between a keyboard and a computer that records all keystrokes and stores them for retrieval. Remote access Trojan, RAT. Definition: a type of Trojan that enables an attacker to gain unauthorized remote access and control over a victim's computer. Example: Dark Comet, a remote access Trojan that allows an attacker to execute commands, capture screenshots, and record audio and video on an infected system. Rootkit. Definition: malware that provides unauthorized access and control over a computer system while hiding its presence and evading detection. Example: a rootkit that modifies the operating system to intercept and manipulate system calls, allowing an attacker to gain administrative privileges. Backdoor. Definition: a hidden method or vulnerability in software or systems that bypasses normal authentication or security controls, providing unauthorized access. Example: a developer inserts a secret backdoor into an application that allows them to bypass authentication and gain administrative access. Password attacks. Definition: techniques used to gain unauthorized access to user accounts or systems by exploiting weak or stolen passwords. Example: brute force attacks that systematically try all possible combinations of characters to guess a user's password. Spraying. Definition: a password attack where an attacker tries a small number of commonly used passwords against multiple user accounts. Example: trying common passwords like password 123456 or admin against a list of user accounts. Dictionary. Definition: a password attack that involves using a predefined list of words and phrases to guess a user's password. Example: trying a list of commonly used passwords or words from a dictionary against a user's account. Brute force. Definition: a password attack that systematically tries all possible combinations of characters until the correct password is found. Example: trying every possible combination of letters, numbers, and symbols to crack a password. Offline. Definition: a password attack where an attacker gains access to a hashed password file and attempts to crack the passwords offline, without accessing the target system. Example: stealing a database of hashed passwords and using powerful hardware or specialized software to crack the passwords. Online. Definition: a password attack where an attacker attempts to guess passwords by directly interacting with the target system. Example: repeatedly trying different passwords against a login prompt until the correct password is found. Rainbow table. Definition: a pre-computed table of encrypted passwords used in password attacks to quickly find the plaintext password corresponding to a given hash. Example: using a rainbow table to look up the corresponding plaintext password for a specific hash obtained from a password file. Plaintext/unencrypted. Definition: passwords that are stored or transmitted without encryption, making them vulnerable to interception or unauthorized access. Example: storing passwords in a database without any form of encryption or hashing. Physical attacks. Definition: attacks that involve gaining unauthorized access to systems or data through physical means. Example: inserting a malicious USB drive into a target system to deliver malware or steal data. Malicious Universal Serial Bus, USB, cable. Definition: a USB cable modified to include additional functionality or malicious code to compromise connected systems. Example: a USB cable that appears normal but contains embedded hardware or firmware to capture keystrokes or transmit data surreptitiously. Malicious flash drive. Definition: a USB flash drive infected with malware or programmed to exploit vulnerabilities in systems it is connected to. Example: a flash drive that automatically executes malicious code when inserted into a computer, without the user's knowledge. Card cloning. Definition: creating a counterfeit copy of a credit or debit card to make unauthorized transactions or gain unauthorized access to cardholder accounts. Example: using a card skimming device to collect card information and then using that information to create cloned cards. Skimming. Definition: the act of capturing and stealing credit or debit card information, often through the use of unauthorized devices or tampering with legitimate card readers. Example: installing a skimming device on an ATM or point-of-sale terminal.
Adversarial artificial intelligence, AI.
Definition: the use of AI techniques to develop or enhance cyber attacks, enabling attackers to automate and adapt their strategies.
Example, using AI algorithms to generate sophisticated phishing emails that mimic human communication patterns to bypass email filters.
Tainted training data for machine learning, ML. Definition: intentionally manipulating or poisoning the data used to train machine learning models to manipulate their behavior or compromise their effectiveness. Example, injecting biased or misleading data into a training dataset to skew the predictions or decisions made by a machine learning model. Security of machine learning algorithms.
Definition: the measures taken to ensure the integrity, confidentiality, and reliability of machine learning algorithms and their output.
Example, implementing robust encryption and access controls to protect machine learning models and their data from unauthorized access or manipulation.
Supply chain attacks.
Definition: attacks that exploit vulnerabilities in the supply chain or software development lifecycle to compromise systems or introduce malicious code. Example, compromising a software vendor's build environment to inject malicious code into their software updates.
Cloud-based versus on-premises attacks.
Definition: attacks that target cloud-based infrastructure or services versus attacks that target on-premises infrastructure or systems.
Example, launching a distributed denial of service, DDoS, attack against a cloud-based service provider to disrupt their services. Cryptographic attacks.
Definition: attacks that exploit vulnerabilities in cryptographic algorithms or protocols to compromise the confidentiality, integrity, or availability of data. Example, using a collision attack to find two different inputs that produce the same hash value, thereby bypassing the integrity checks of a digital signature.
Birthday.
Definition: a cryptographic attack that exploits the probability of two different inputs producing the same hash value in a hash function. Example, exploiting the birthday paradox to find two different passwords that produce the same hash, allowing an attacker to bypass authentication.
Collision.
Definition: a cryptographic attack where two different inputs produce the same hash value, compromising the integrity and security of the hash function. Example, finding two different documents with the same hash value, allowing an attacker to replace one document with the other without detection.
Downgrade.
Definition: a cryptographic attack that forces the use of weaker or outdated cryptographic algorithms or protocols, making them susceptible to attacks. Example, forcing a secure communication channel to use an older version of the encryption protocol that has known vulnerabilities. 1.3 Given a scenario, analyze potential indicators to determine the type of attack.
Privilege escalation. Definition: privilege escalation refers to the process of gaining elevated privileges or permissions beyond what a user should have.
Example, an attacker exploits a vulnerability in a system to gain administrative access and control over the entire network.
Cross-site scripting, XSS. Definition: XSS occurs when an attacker injects malicious scripts into a trusted website that is viewed by other users, potentially leading to unauthorized actions or data theft. Example, an attacker injects a script into a forum post, and when other users view the post, the script executes on their browsers, stealing their session cookies. Injections. Structured query language, SQL, injection.
Definition: SQL injection is a technique where an attacker inserts malicious SQL statements into a query to manipulate or access the database. Example, an attacker enters or1 is equal to 1 into a login form, bypassing the authentication process and gaining unauthorized access to the system.
Dynamic Link Library, DLL, injection. Definition: DLL injection involves inserting malicious code into a running process by manipulating the loading of DLL files. Example, an attacker injects a DLL into a legitimate process, allowing them to monitor and manipulate the process's behavior. Lightweight Directory Access Protocol, LDAP, injection.
Definition: LDAP injection occurs when an attacker exploits a vulnerability in an application that uses LDAP to modify or retrieve data from a directory service. Example, an attacker injects LDAP queries to bypass authentication and gain unauthorized access to sensitive information stored in an LDAP directory.
Extensible Markup Language, XML, injection. Definition: XML injection happens when an attacker manipulates XML input to exploit vulnerabilities in an application's parsing process. Example, an attacker injects specially crafted XML data to modify or execute unintended actions in an application that improperly processes XML.
Pointer/object dereference. Definition: pointer/object dereference vulnerabilities occur when an application improperly accesses or uses a memory address, leading to crashes or arbitrary code execution.
Example, an attacker exploits a buffer overflow vulnerability to overwrite a pointer, causing the application to execute malicious code. Directory traversal. Definition: directory traversal refers to an attack where an attacker traverses through file system directories to access files or directories outside of the intended scope. Example, an attacker manipulates a web application's input to navigate to sensitive directories and download confidential files, such as /etc/password. Buffer overflows. Definition: buffer overflows occur when an application writes data beyond the allocated buffer size, potentially allowing an attacker to overwrite adjacent memory areas. Example, an attacker sends an excessively long input to a vulnerable application, overflows the buffer, and injects malicious code into the memory, leading to arbitrary code execution. Race conditions, time of check/time of use. Definition: race conditions happen when multiple processes or threads access shared resources simultaneously, leading to unexpected or insecure outcomes. Example, an attacker exploits a race condition in a multi-threaded application to modify a file after it has been checked for access permissions, but before it is used, bypassing security controls. Error handling. Definition: error handling vulnerabilities occur when an application's error messages or exceptions provide useful information to an attacker, facilitating further exploitation. Example, an application displays detailed error messages that reveal sensitive system information, such as database credentials or server paths, aiding an attacker in planning subsequent attacks. Improper input handling. Definition: improper input handling vulnerabilities occur when an application does not validate or sanitize user input, allowing attackers to manipulate data or exploit application vulnerabilities. Example, an application fails to validate user-supplied data and blindly executes system commands, enabling an attacker to execute arbitrary commands on the underlying system. Replay attack, session replays. Definition: a replay attack involves capturing and reusing data or requests to impersonate a legitimate user or gain unauthorized access. Example, an attacker captures network traffic containing a user's session cookie and replays it to gain unauthorized access to the application or impersonate the user. Integer overflow.
Definition: integer overflow occurs when the result of an arithmetic operation exceeds the maximum value that can be stored in the assigned data type, leading to unexpected behavior or security vulnerabilities. Hashing cookie and replays it to gain unauthorized access to the application or impersonate the user. Example: an attacker manipulates input values to cause an integer overflow, which results in a buffer overflow, allowing them to execute arbitrary code. Request forgeries. Server-side request forgery. Definition: server-side request forgery, SSRF, is an attack where an attacker tricks a server into making malicious requests to other internal or external systems.
Example: an attacker exploits an SSRF vulnerability to make the server send requests to internal network resources, retrieve sensitive information, or perform unauthorized actions. Cross-site request forgery, CSRF. Definition: CSRF occurs when an attacker tricks a user's browser into executing unwanted actions on a trusted website on their behalf.
Example: an attacker sends a malicious link to a victim who unknowingly visits it.
The link triggers a request to transfer funds from the victim's account to the attacker's account. Application Programming Interface, API, attacks.
Definition: API attacks involve exploiting vulnerabilities or weaknesses in an application's API, allowing unauthorized access, data leakage, or denial of service.
Example: an attacker exploits an insecurely implemented API by bypassing authentication, injecting malicious data, or overwhelming the API with excessive requests to disrupt its availability. Resource exhaustion. Definition: resource exhaustion occurs when an attacker consumes excessive resources such as CPU, memory, or network bandwidth, causing a denial of service or performance degradation. Example: an attacker floods a web server with a high volume of requests, exhausting its processing capacity and making the website unavailable to legitimate users. Memory leak. Definition: a memory leak happens when a program fails to release allocated memory, leading to a gradual depletion of available memory resources. Example: an application continually allocates memory but does not release it, eventually causing the system to crash or become unresponsive due to insufficient memory. Secure Sockets Layer, SSL, stripping. Definition: SSL stripping is an attack where an attacker intercepts secure HTTPS connections and downgrades them to unencrypted HTTP, allowing them to intercept sensitive information. Example: an attacker alters network traffic, forcing users to connect to a non-HTTPS version of a website, intercepting and capturing their login credentials or other sensitive data. Driver manipulation. Shimming. Definition: shimming involves modifying or adding code to the existing driver's functionality to intercept or manipulate system calls. Example: an attacker injects a shim between an application and the driver, capturing sensitive information or modifying data as it passes through. Refactoring. Definition: refactoring refers to modifying the internal structure or behavior of a driver to introduce vulnerabilities or enable malicious actions. Example: an attacker modifies a device driver to allow unauthorized access or execute arbitrary code, compromising the security and integrity of the system. Pass the hash. Definition: pass the hash is an attack where an attacker uses stolen password hashes to authenticate and gain unauthorized access to systems or resources. Example: an attacker obtains a password hash from one system, then uses it to authenticate and gain access to other systems where the same password is used. 1.4 Given a scenario, analyze potential indicators associated with network attacks. Wireless attacks.
Evil twin. In this attack, an attacker sets up a fake wireless access point, AP, with the same name as a legitimate AP to trick users into connecting to it.
Example, an attacker creates an access point named free Wi-Fi to lure users into connecting and capturing their sensitive information.
Rogue access point. It refers to an unauthorized wireless AP that is installed on a network without proper authorization. Example, an employee sets up a personal wireless AP in the office to bypass network security measures. Bluesnarfing. It is the unauthorized access of information from a Bluetooth-enabled device, such as phones, tablets, or laptops. Example, an attacker gains access to a victim's smartphone and retrieves their contacts, messages, and other personal data.
Bluejacking. It involves sending unsolicited messages or business cards to Bluetooth-enabled devices.
Example, an attacker sends a random message to all discoverable Bluetooth devices in a crowded public place. Disassociation. It is an attack where an attacker forcibly disconnects a client device from a wireless network.
Example, an attacker sends a deauthentication frame to disconnect a user from a Wi-Fi network. Jamming. It refers to the interference of wireless signals, disrupting the normal functioning of wireless networks.
Example, an attacker uses a powerful jamming device to disrupt the Wi-Fi signals in a specific area, causing network outages. Radio frequency identification, RFID. It is a technology that uses electromagnetic fields to automatically identify and track tags attached to objects. Example, RFID tags attached to merchandise in a retail store to track inventory. Near-field communication, NFC. It is a short-range wireless communication technology used for contactless transactions.
Example, paying for purchases by tapping a smartphone on an NFC-enabled payment terminal.
Initialization vector, for it is a random value used in encryption algorithms to ensure unique encryption keys and prevent attacks on encrypted data. Example, in WEP, wired equivalent privacy, encryption, the 4 is used to encrypt wireless data.
On-path attack.
Previously known as a man-in-the-middle attack or man-in-the-browser attack, it involves an attacker intercepting communication between two parties to eavesdrop, modify, or inject malicious content. Example, an attacker intercepts communication between a user and a banking website to capture login credentials.
Layer 2 attacks.
Address Resolution Protocol, ARP, poisoning. It involves an attacker sending fake ARP messages to associate their MAC address with the IP address of another device, enabling them to intercept traffic.
Example, an attacker spoofs ARP messages to associate their MAC address with the IP address of a router, redirecting all traffic through their system.
Media Access Control, MAC, flooding. It floods the switch's CAM table with fake MAC addresses, causing it to enter fail-open mode, allowing the attacker to intercept traffic. Example, an attacker floods a switch's CAM table with numerous MAC addresses, exhausting its resources and making it vulnerable to interception. MAC cloning. It involves copying the MAC address of a legitimate device and using it to bypass MAC-based access controls. Example, an attacker clones the MAC address of an authorized device to gain network access.
Domain Name System, DNS, attacks. Domain hijacking. It involves an attacker gaining control over a domain name without the legitimate owner's consent. Example, an attacker compromises the DNS registrar account of a domain and redirects traffic to a malicious website. DNS poisoning. It refers to the alteration of DNS records to redirect traffic to malicious or unintended destinations. Example, an attacker modifies DNS records to redirect users to a phishing website when they try to access a legitimate banking website.
Uniform Resource Locator (URL) redirection. It redirects users to a different URL, often to a malicious website, without their knowledge. Example: an attacker modifies a legitimate URL to redirect users to a malicious website hosting malware. Domain reputation. It refers to the reputation of a domain name based on its historical behavior, associations, and security practices. Example: a domain with a history of sending spam emails might have a poor reputation. Distributed denial of service (DDoS) attacks. Network DDoS. It involves overwhelming a target network with a massive volume of traffic, rendering it inaccessible to legitimate users. Example: an attacker uses a botnet to flood a website's servers with a high volume of requests, causing them to crash. Application DDoS. It targets specific applications or services, overwhelming them with excessive requests or resource consumption. Example: an attacker floods a web application with HTTP requests, exhausting its resources and causing it to slow down or crash. Operational technology (OT) DDoS. It targets industrial control systems such as SCADA, supervisory control and data acquisition, to disrupt critical infrastructure operations. Example: an attacker launches a DDoS attack on a power grid SCADA system, causing a blackout. Malicious code or script execution. PowerShell. It is a command-line shell and scripting language used in Windows environments. Example: an attacker uses PowerShell to execute a script that downloads and installs malware on a victim's computer. Python. It is a versatile programming language that can be used for various purposes, including creating malicious scripts. Example: an attacker develops a Python script that exploits a vulnerability in a web application. Bash. It is a Unix shell and command language commonly used in Linux and macOS environments. Example: an attacker leverages a bash script to exploit a misconfigured server and gain unauthorized access. Macros. They are scripts or codes embedded in documents, such as Microsoft Office files, that can execute malicious actions when opened. Example: an attacker creates a Word document with a macro that downloads and executes malware when the document is opened. Visual Basic for Applications (VBA). It is a programming language used to automate tasks within Microsoft Office applications and can be abused by attackers. Example: an attacker crafts an Excel spreadsheet with VBA code that steals sensitive information when the spreadsheet is opened. 1.5 Explain different threat actors, vectors, and intelligence sources. Actors and threats. Advanced Persistent Threat (APTs) are sophisticated, targeted attacks carried out by well-funded and highly skilled adversaries over an extended period. Example: a nation-state-sponsored group infiltrating a government agency's network to gather sensitive information. Insider threats. Insider threats refer to individuals within an organization who misuse their authorized access to compromise security. Example: an employee stealing confidential customer data and selling it to a competitor. State actors. State actors are government-sponsored entities engaged in cyber-espionage or cyber warfare. Example: a government agency conducting cyber operations to gather intelligence from foreign countries. Hacktivists. Hacktivists are individuals or groups who hack systems to promote a social or political agenda. Example: a hacktivist group defacing a website to protest against an organization's environmental policies. Script kiddies. Script kiddies are individuals with limited technical skills who use pre-written scripts or tools to launch attacks. Example: a script kiddie using a readily available tool to launch a DDoS attack on a gaming server for fun. Criminal syndicates. Criminal syndicates are organized groups involved in cybercrime, such as identity theft, financial fraud, or ransomware attacks. Example: a criminal syndicate targeting a financial institution to steal credit card information.
Hackers are individuals with advanced technical skills and knowledge who exploit vulnerabilities in systems.
Example: a hacker exploiting a web application vulnerability to gain unauthorized access to a company's database.
Authorized, unauthorized, semi-authorized, these terms describe the level of access an individual has to systems or data.
Example: an authorized user has legitimate access rights, while an unauthorized user has no legitimate access. A semi-authorized user may have limited access rights but attempts to escalate privileges.
Shadow IT refers to technology or software used within an organization without proper authorization or oversight.
Example: employees using personal cloud storage services to store and share sensitive company documents.
Competitors may engage in espionage or sabotage to gain an advantage over rival organizations.
Example: a competitor attempting to infiltrate a competitor's network to steal product designs or customer data.
Attributes of actors.
Internal/external. Internal actors are individuals within an organization, while external actors are individuals or entities outside the organization. Example: an internal actor could be an employee with authorized access, whereas an external actor could be a hacker attempting to breach the organization's defenses. Level of sophistication/capability. This attribute describes the technical expertise and resources available to an actor. Example: a highly sophisticated actor may have advanced hacking tools, knowledge of zero-day vulnerabilities, and the ability to evade detection.
Resources/funding. It refers to the financial and technological resources available to an actor.
Example: state-sponsored actors have significant resources and funding, enabling them to carry out complex and prolonged cyber attacks.
Intent/motivation. The intent or motivation of an actor determines their goals and objectives.
Example: hacktivists may be motivated by a desire for social justice or political change, while criminals are motivated by financial gain.
Vectors. Direct access. Direct access refers to physical access to a system or network infrastructure.
Example: a malicious actor gaining physical access to a server room to install a hardware keylogger.
Wireless vectors involve exploiting vulnerabilities in wireless networks or devices. Example: an attacker intercepting unencrypted Wi-Fi traffic to capture sensitive information. Email vectors involve using malicious emails, attachments, or links to exploit vulnerabilities or trick users into disclosing sensitive information.
Example: a phishing email tricking a user into providing their login credentials by posing as a legitimate organization. Supply chain vectors involve compromising the security of a product or service during its development or distribution process. Example: a malicious actor injecting malware into a software update before it is distributed to customers. Social media vectors involve exploiting trust relationships or sharing malicious links or content through social media platforms. Example: a hacker creating a fake social media account to trick users into clicking on a link that leads to a malware-infected website. Removable media vectors involve using infected USB drives or other removable devices to introduce malware into a system. Example: an attacker inserting a USB drive containing malware into a company computer to gain unauthorized access.
Cloud vectors involve exploiting vulnerabilities in cloud-based services or misconfigurations in cloud environments.
Example: a hacker exploiting weak access controls in a cloud storage service to gain unauthorized access to sensitive data.
Threat intelligence sources.
Open source intelligence, OSINT, refers to information collected from publicly available sources, such as news articles, social media, or online forums.
Example, monitoring hacker forums to gather information about new attack techniques.
Closed/proprietary, closed or proprietary sources refer to intelligence collected from restricted or specialized sources. Example, a security vendor's internal threat intelligence database containing information about emerging threats. Vulnerability databases. These databases provide information about known vulnerabilities in software, hardware, or systems. Example, the Common Vulnerabilities and Exposures (CVE) database maintained by MITRE. Public/private information sharing centers. These centers facilitate the exchange of threat intelligence and best practices among organizations. Example, the Financial Services Information Sharing and Analysis Center, FSACC, shares cybersecurity information within the financial industry. Dark web. The dark web refers to hidden online networks used for illicit activities. It may contain forums, marketplaces, or chat rooms where threat actors exchange information or sell hacking tools. Example, monitoring dark web marketplaces for stolen credentials or exploit kits. Indicators of compromise. IOCs are artifacts or behaviors that indicate a system has been compromised or is under attack. Example, IP addresses, domain names, or file hashes associated with known malware. Automated indicator sharing. AIS platforms automate the exchange of threat intelligence between organizations in real time. Example, STIX/TAXII-based platforms enabling organizations to share IOCs and threat intelligence feeds. Structured Threat Information Expression, STIX/Trusted Automated Exchange of Intelligence Information, TAXII. These are standard formats and protocols for exchanging cyber threat intelligence. Example, STIX/TAXII is used to share IOCs and threat information between security vendors and organizations. Predictive analysis. Predictive analysis involves using historical data and statistical models to anticipate future threats or attacks. Example, analyzing patterns of previous attacks to predict the likelihood of future similar attacks. Threat maps. Threat maps provide visual representations of global cyber threats and attacks. Example, a real-time map showing the distribution and intensity of DDoS attacks worldwide. File/code repositories. These repositories store and share code or files, including information about vulnerabilities and security fixes. Example, GitHub or GitLab repositories containing open-source projects and security-related code. Research sources. Vendor websites. Security vendors provide information about their products, vulnerabilities, and best practices on their websites. Example, checking a firewall vendor's website for the latest firmware updates and security advisories. Vulnerability feeds. Subscription-based vulnerability feeds provide timely information about new vulnerabilities and patches. Example, subscribing to the National Vulnerability Database, NVD, for alerts about new vulnerabilities. Conferences. Security conferences bring together experts to share research, insights, and best practices in the field of cybersecurity. Example, attending the Black Hat or DEF CON conferences to learn about the latest threats and attack techniques. Academic journals. Academic journals publish peer-reviewed research papers on various aspects of cybersecurity. Example, reading research papers published in the IEEE Transactions on Information Forensics and Security Journal. Request for comments. RFC documents describe standards, protocols, and best practices in the field of networking and security. Example,
reviewing RFC documents related to secure protocols like TLS or IPsec. Local industry groups or associations often organize events and provide resources for cybersecurity professionals. Example, participating in meetups or joining a local chapter of a security professionals organization. Social media, following security experts, industry influencers, and security-related accounts on platforms like Twitter or LinkedIn to stay updated with the latest trends and news in cybersecurity. Threat feeds provide real-time information about emerging threats, indicators of compromise, or malicious IP addresses. Example, subscribing to a threat intelligence feed that provides regular updates on new malware campaigns. Adversary tactics, techniques, and procedures. TTP resources document known tactics, techniques, and procedures used by threat actors. Example, analyzing MITRE ATT and CK framework to understand common attack techniques and mitigation strategies. 1.6 Explain different threat actors, vectors, and intelligence sources. Cloud-based versus on-premises vulnerabilities. Cloud-based vulnerabilities specific to cloud environments include misconfigurations, insecure APIs, data breaches due to shared resources, and unauthorized access to cloud storage. Example, improperly configured S3 bucket permissions leading to the exposure of sensitive data. On-premises vulnerabilities encompass weaknesses in local network infrastructure, hardware, and software, such as unpatched systems, weak access controls, and physical security lapses. Example, failure to update a critical security patch on an on-premises server, resulting in a successful exploit. Zero-day. Zero-day refers to a vulnerability or software flaw that is unknown to the software vendor or has no official patch available. Example, a hacker discovers a previously unknown vulnerability in a popular web browser and exploits it before the vendor releases a patch. Weak configurations. Open permissions, allowing overly permissive access rights to users, applications, or systems, potentially leading to unauthorized access or data leakage. Example, granting read and write permissions to all employees on a sensitive database. Unsecure root accounts, failing to secure or disable default administrative or root accounts, making them potential targets for exploitation. Example, leaving the default root account with a weak password on a server. Errors, configuration errors or oversights that can introduce security vulnerabilities, such as leaving debug or test settings enabled in production environments. Example, forgetting to disable debug mode on a web application, exposing sensitive information in error messages. Weak encryption, using weak encryption algorithms or improperly configuring encryption protocols, compromising the confidentiality and integrity of data. Example, storing passwords using an outdated or easily crackable encryption algorithm. Unsecure protocols, using insecure network protocols such as FTP or Telnet, that transmit data in plaintext, making it vulnerable to interception. Example, using Telnet for remote administration, allowing an attacker to capture sensitive login credentials. Default settings, neglecting to change default settings or configurations, leaving systems susceptible to known vulnerabilities or unauthorized access. Example, failing to change the default login credentials on network devices or IoT devices. Open ports and services, running unnecessary or outdated services on open ports, increasing the attack surface and providing potential entry points for attackers. Example, leaving unused services like Telnet or Remote Desktop Protocol, RDP, enabled on external-facing servers. Third-party risks.
Vendor management, inadequate oversight or control over third-party vendors and their security practices, potentially introducing vulnerabilities or unauthorized access. Example: a vendor with weak security controls compromises sensitive customer data. System integration, integration of third-party systems or software with existing infrastructure, which may introduce vulnerabilities if not properly tested or secured. Example: integrating a poorly vetted third-party payment gateway that exposes customer payment card information. Lack of vendor support, using third-party software or hardware that is no longer supported or maintained, leaving systems vulnerable to unpatched vulnerabilities. Example: continued use of an outdated operating system without vendor-provided security updates. Supply chain, security risks associated with suppliers, manufacturers, or distributors who may introduce malicious components or compromise the integrity of the supply chain. Example: a compromised hardware component inserted into network devices during the manufacturing process. Outsourced code development, depending on code developed by external contractors or offshore developers without proper security controls, introducing potential vulnerabilities. Example: using outsourced code that contains undisclosed backdoors or malicious code. Data storage, entrusting sensitive data to third-party cloud service providers or data centers, introducing risks related to data confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Example: storing customer data with a cloud provider that experiences a data breach, resulting in unauthorized access to sensitive information. Improper or weak patch management. Firmware, neglecting to update firmware on devices, such as routers or IoT devices, which may contain security vulnerabilities. Example: failing to apply a critical firmware update on a network router, allowing an attacker to exploit a known vulnerability. Operating system OS not applying security patches or updates to operating systems, leaving systems exposed to known vulnerabilities. Example: delaying the installation of a security patch for an OS, leading to successful ransomware infections. Applications, not updating or patching applications regularly, exposing them to exploits and potential unauthorized access. Example: running an outdated web server version with unpatched vulnerabilities, enabling attackers to compromise the server. Legacy platforms. Legacy platforms refer to outdated hardware or software that is no longer actively supported by vendors, making them more susceptible to attacks due to unpatched vulnerabilities. Example: continued use of an unsupported operating system version that lacks security updates. Impacts: data loss, unauthorized access, accidental deletion, or hardware failures leading to the permanent loss of critical data. Example: a database server failure resulting in the irretrievable loss of customer records. Data breaches, unauthorized access or exposure of sensitive information, potentially leading to identity theft or financial losses. Example: hackers infiltrating a company's network and stealing customer credit card information. Data exfiltration, unauthorized extraction or theft of data, often for malicious purposes or financial gain. Example: a malicious insider copying sensitive customer data and selling it on the dark web. Identity theft, unauthorized use of personal information for fraudulent activities, leading to financial losses or reputational damage. Example: an attacker using stolen credentials to make unauthorized purchases using a victim's identity. Financial losses incurred due to financial fraud, ransom payments, or regulatory fines resulting from security breaches. Example: a company paying a ransom to regain access to their encrypted data. Reputation, damage to an organization's reputation due to security breaches, leading to loss of customer trust and business opportunities.
Example, negative media coverage and public backlash following a data breach. Availability loss, denial of service or disruptions that render systems or services inaccessible, impacting business operations or customer access. Example, a DDoS attack overwhelmed a company's website, making it unavailable to legitimate users. 1.7 Explain different threat actors, vectors, and intelligence sources. Threat hunting. Threat hunting involves proactively searching for and identifying potential security threats and indicators of compromise within an organization's network or systems. Example, analyzing network logs, system events, and traffic patterns to detect signs of unauthorized access or suspicious activity. Intelligence fusion. Intelligence fusion involves collecting and analyzing information from various sources to gain a comprehensive understanding of threats and potential risks. Example, combining data from threat feeds, open source intelligence, OSINT, and internal security logs to identify emerging threats and trends. Threat feeds. Threat feeds provide real-time or near real-time information about known malicious activities, indicators of compromise, IOCs, or emerging threats. Example, subscribing to a threat feed service that delivers regular updates on new malware strains and their associated IOCs. Advisories and bulletins. Advisories and bulletins are official communications that provide information about vulnerabilities, patches, or security best practices issued by vendors or security organizations. Example, reading a security advisory from a software vendor about a critical vulnerability and recommended mitigation steps. Maneuver. Maneuver refers to the techniques and actions taken to navigate through security incidents, such as containment, eradication, and recovery. Example, isolating compromised systems from the network, removing malware, and restoring from backups to recover from a security breach. Vulnerability scans. Vulnerability scans involve automated assessments of systems, applications, or networks to identify known vulnerabilities. Example, using a vulnerability scanning tool to identify missing patches, misconfigurations, or weak encryption settings in a network infrastructure. False positives. False positives are results generated by security tools that incorrectly identify legitimate activities or systems as malicious or vulnerable. Example, a vulnerability scanner flagging a system as susceptible to a specific vulnerability, but further investigation reveals that the system is properly patched and protected. False negatives. False negatives occur when security tools fail to detect actual threats or vulnerabilities, providing a false sense of security. Example, an intrusion detection system failing to detect a sophisticated advanced persistent threat, APT, attack due to evasion techniques employed by the attacker. Log reviews. Log reviews involve examining logs generated by various systems and applications to identify security events, anomalies, or suspicious activities. Example, analyzing firewall logs to identify unauthorized access attempts or unusual network traffic patterns. Credentialed versus non-credentialed scans. Credentialed scans involve using privileged credentials to assess systems and gather detailed information, while non-credentialed scans are performed without specific access credentials. Example, conducting a credentialed scan to evaluate the security posture of a database server by accessing its configuration settings and reviewing logs. Intrusive versus non-intrusive scans. Intrusive scans actively probe systems or networks to identify vulnerabilities,
while non-intrusive scans rely on passive methods that do not disrupt normal operations.
Example, performing an intrusive scan that sends specially crafted packets to a web server to test for common web application vulnerabilities. Application and web application scans. Application scans involve assessing the security of software applications, while web application scans focus specifically on web-based applications and their vulnerabilities. Example, using a web application scanner to identify common vulnerabilities such as cross-site scripting, XSS, or SQL injection in an e-commerce website. Network scans. Network scans involve mapping and analyzing network infrastructure to identify vulnerabilities, misconfigurations, or unauthorized devices. Example, conducting a network scan to discover open ports, identify outdated protocols, or detect rogue devices connected to the network. Common Vulnerabilities and Exposures, CVE/Common Vulnerability Scoring System, CVSS. CVE is a dictionary of known vulnerabilities, while CVSS provides a standard method for assessing and scoring the severity of vulnerabilities. Example, checking the CVE database and CVSS scores to determine the impact and urgency of a newly discovered vulnerability. Configuration review. Configuration review involves examining system configurations against security best practices or predefined security baselines to identify potential vulnerabilities or weaknesses. Example, reviewing server configurations to ensure that unnecessary services are disabled, access controls are properly enforced, and encryption protocols are correctly implemented. Syslog/Security Information and Event Management, SIEM. Syslog is a standard protocol used for collecting and forwarding log messages, while SIEM platforms provide centralized log management, correlation, and analysis. Example, configuring a SIEM to collect and analyze logs from various network devices, servers, and security appliances. Review reports. Reviewing reports generated by security tools and SIEM platforms to gain insights into security events, trends, or potential threats. Example, analyzing a SIEM report that highlights a sudden increase in failed login attempts from a specific IP address range, indicating a potential brute force attack. Packet capture. Packet capture involves capturing and analyzing network traffic to identify malicious or suspicious activities. Example, using a packet capture tool like Wireshark to capture network packets during a suspected security incident for detailed analysis. Data inputs. Data inputs in the context of security monitoring refer to various information sources, such as logs, event data, threat intelligence feeds, or user behavior data. Example, incorporating firewall logs, system logs, and threat intelligence feeds as data inputs into a security monitoring system. User behavior analysis. User behavior analysis involves monitoring and analyzing user activities and patterns to identify anomalies or potential insider threats. Example, identifying a user account that is accessing sensitive data outside of their regular working hours or attempting to access restricted resources. Sentiment analysis. Sentiment analysis refers to the process of evaluating and categorizing the tone or sentiment expressed in textual data, such as social media posts or customer feedback, to identify potential security risks or reputational threats. Example, analyzing social media posts for mentions of a company's name along with negative or concerning sentiments related to security incidents or data breaches. Security monitoring. Security monitoring involves continuous monitoring and analysis of network, system, and application activities to detect and respond to security incidents or anomalies.
Example, monitoring network traffic, system logs, and security events in real time to identify and mitigate potential security breaches.
Log aggregation.
Log aggregation involves collecting logs from various systems and devices into a centralized repository for efficient analysis and correlation. Example, sending logs from firewalls, servers, and network devices to a centralized log management platform for consolidation and analysis.
Log collectors.
Log collectors are software or devices responsible for collecting logs from various sources and forwarding them to a centralized log management system. Example, deploying log collectors in remote branch offices to collect and transmit logs to a central security information and event management (SIEM) system.
Security orchestration, automation, and response (SOAR).
SOAR refers to the integration of security tools, automation of security processes, and orchestration of incident response activities to streamline and enhance security operations. Example, implementing a SOAR platform to automatically enrich security alerts with threat intelligence, trigger automated response actions, and generate comprehensive incident reports.
1.8 Explain the techniques used in penetration testing. Penetration testing.
Known environment. Penetration testing in a known environment involves testing the security of systems and networks where comprehensive information and documentation are available. Example, conducting a penetration test on a web application with access to its source code, network diagrams, and system configurations.
Unknown environment. Penetration testing in an unknown environment requires assessing the security of systems and networks with limited or no prior knowledge. Example, performing a penetration test on a target network without any information about its infrastructure, applications, or vulnerabilities. Partially known environment. Penetration testing in a partially known environment involves testing systems and networks with some information available, but not comprehensive knowledge. Example, conducting a penetration test on an organization's network with limited knowledge of the network topology and a few identified systems. Rules of engagement. Rules of engagement define the scope, limitations, and objectives of a penetration test, including what is allowed and what is off limits. Example, establishing rules that prohibit the testing of production systems or sensitive customer data during a penetration test. Lateral movement. Lateral movement refers to the process of moving laterally within a network or system to gain further access privileges or explore other target systems. Example, exploiting a vulnerable server to gain access to other systems within the network, escalating privileges along the way. Privilege escalation. Privilege escalation involves obtaining higher-level access or permissions on a system or network than originally granted. Example, exploiting a misconfigured service to escalate from a regular user to an administrator-level account. Persistence. Persistence refers to maintaining unauthorized access or control over a compromised system or network for an extended period without being detected. Example, installing a backdoor or rootkit on a compromised server to ensure ongoing access even after remediation efforts. Cleanup. Cleanup involves removing traces of activities and restoring systems to their original state after completing a penetration test. Example, erasing log files, removing unauthorized accounts, and reverting system configurations to their pre-test state. Bug bounty. Bug bounty programs encourage security researchers to identify and report vulnerabilities in exchange for monetary rewards or recognition. Example, offering a monetary reward to individuals who discover and responsibly disclose security vulnerabilities in a company's website. Pivoting. Pivoting refers to using compromised systems as a stepping stone to gain access to other systems or networks. Example,
exploiting a compromised user workstation to gain access to the internal network and target higher value systems.
Passive and active reconnaissance.
Passive reconnaissance. Passive reconnaissance involves gathering information about a target system or network without directly interacting with it, such as collecting publicly available data or analyzing network traffic. Example, monitoring publicly accessible websites or social media profiles to gather information about an organization's employees or infrastructure. Active reconnaissance. Active reconnaissance involves actively probing a target system or network to gather information, such as conducting port scans or sending probing requests. Example, using network scanning tools to identify open ports, services, and vulnerabilities on a target network.
Drones.
Drones can be used for reconnaissance purposes, such as aerial surveys, collecting wireless network information, or identifying physical security vulnerabilities. Example, flying a drone equipped with Wi-Fi scanning capabilities to identify vulnerable or unsecured wireless networks.
War flying. War flying involves using drones or other aerial platforms to conduct wireless network reconnaissance while in motion.
Example, flying a drone equipped with a Wi-Fi antenna to capture wireless network signals and identify potential vulnerabilities.
War driving.
War driving involves driving around in a vehicle equipped with Wi-Fi antennas to detect and map wireless networks and identify their vulnerabilities. Example, driving through a city while scanning for open or misconfigured wireless networks and documenting their locations and security weaknesses.
Footprinting.
Footprinting refers to the process of gathering information about a target system, network, or organization to identify potential vulnerabilities or entry points. Example, collecting publicly available information about an organization's infrastructure, employees, or partners through sources like websites, social media, or public records.
OSINT, Open Source Intelligence.
OSINT refers to information collected from publicly available sources, such as news articles, social media, or online forums. Example, using search engines and specialized tools to gather information about an organization's employees, technologies, or recent security incidents.
Exercise types.
Red Team. A red team exercises simulate real-world attacks on an organization's systems or networks to test their security posture and identify vulnerabilities. Example, a red team attempting to breach an organization's network using various attack techniques, such as social engineering, penetration testing, and physical infiltration. Blue Team. A blue team exercises involve defensive activities, such as monitoring, detecting, and responding to simulated attacks, to assess an organization's ability to defend against threats. Example, a blue team analyzing network logs, detecting and mitigating a simulated DDoS attack, and implementing security controls. White Team. A white team exercises focus on evaluating and assessing security measures, policies, or controls in an organization without conducting actual attacks. Example, a white team reviewing security policies and procedures, conducting risk assessments, and providing recommendations for improvements. Purple Team. A purple team exercise combines elements of both red and blue team activities, facilitating collaboration and knowledge sharing between offensive and defensive security teams. Example, a purple team exercise where the red team performs simulated attacks, and the blue team actively defends against them, followed by joint analysis and improvement recommendations.